The word blog comes from weblog, from www World Wide Web page, and log. Here's a screenshot of an old web page from the early 90s. You can see that it's very static looking, just an image, and a small amount of information that didn't change much at all. Any different information is given on another web page arrived at by clicking on a button or a link. In fact, it seems quite boring, and there's no way for the author to add, or change information, or for the viewers to make comments. It's not socially engaging at all. Let's take a look at how humans have catalogued their life's moments over time. For example, the captain of a ship was expected to fill in a ship's logbook, into which daily experiences were registered, at the relevant times of day or night. It's a real-life record of everything that happened to the ship and its company, during a voyage, something like a diary. So there we have it. The birth of the weblog or blog. A space on the internet where one can write regularly about one's reflections, about anything you'd like to share with your public. Nowadays most of you either have a blog or have seen quite a few blogs in your experiences while surfing the net. The myriad types of blogs are superseded by the topics written about. From cooking to dieting, sports to politics, critiques on art, and glimpses at life. The list goes on and on. Actually, you can write a blog about anything that you want to have an opinion on, or just simply have your say. Most blogs rely on a last in first out entry, which basically means your latest word is always the first thing people see when they go to your blog. In simpler terms, entries are made in a reverse date order and are open to comments by the public. Although comments are part and parcel of blogs, you can actually turn off comments or, as the owner of a blog, you can decide not to display a comment or multiple comments, keeping just the ones you like. This may sound egotistical, but after all it's your opinion and ideas that are in black on white and open to public scrutiny. So you needn't justify what you want to see on your blog.
Okay Neves, so blogs, or something like them, logs or diaries have been around for quite a while. How long do you think we've been using them?
Well, we know that sailing ships have used ship's logs for a long time, and diaries were very popular during the 18th and 19th centuries. Take for example the Diary of Anne Frank, where a personal diary became a public item, so I suppose for hundreds of years. What do you think, Tom?
Well, I think maybe a little longer than 600 or 700 years. Actually a little longer than 6,000 or 7,000 years. Maybe we started blogging about 26,000 years ago. You see, it all started here, in these very famous places. When Cousin Og came back from the hunt with the boys, they would sit around chugging a couple of beers and draw about their experiences and tell everybody how many mammoths they had slain and where the best bison were to be had. There must have been some great comments made about their exploits, but, unluckily for us, writing hadn't been invented yet, so we would have to wait until about 20,000 years later to start reading people's reflections. Nobody really knows where, or when writing first started. Examples have been found in China and Sumeria dating back to more than 6,500 years ago. These baked clay tablets are the first permanent records of man's attempt to communicate via writing. The one on the left tells us about the Sumerian version of the biblical flood. However, the vast majority of the hundreds of thousands of tablets and seals found, only talk about trade, business transactions and government records. They were private and not for showing to the general public. However, the need to record daily events, be it transactions or such, was an ongoing practice since these very early periods in the history of mankind. At about the time of the emergence of cuneiform, the Egyptians were developing their own writing system, consisting of characters called hieroglyphs, from the Greek, meaning sacred carving. They were possibly based on pictograms, ideograms and rebus devices. They were written on papyrus scrolls, or carved and painted on the pyramids and other official buildings. The pyramids of Egypt contain an awesome array of well-preserved hieroglyphs, and we have learned much about the Egyptians from the writings in their temples and tombs. The symbols used eventually came to represent syllables, and thus far the written language shared the syllabic aspect with Mesopotamia and Babylon. But with the evolution of writing from pictorial to syllabic, it must have become more difficult for the common man to understand. Only the learned could read, and only the specialist write. Modern man pondered over the meanings of the Egyptian hieroglyphics, but it wasn't until the discovery of the Rosetta Stone that they could be deciphered. The stone shows the same tract in hieroglyphics: Demotic, an Egyptian longhand, and ancient Greek. The Greeks were the first to start writing about things other than religion, and the history of kings. They started the first real journals, epic stories about their heroes' odysseys, and philosophical home truths. Books, as we know them, were very scarce, although there were some made of metal leaves. Virtually everything was written on scrolls made from papyrus, vellum, or parchment, and would be for a couple of thousand years more. Things really got going with the Romans. With the fall of Greece and the rise of Rome during the 1st century BC. The Romans literally invented the journal and the diary, two very similar words. Journal comes from the Latin diurno and diary from diario. And Julius Caesar made plans for a public library, trying to go one up on the Greek Egyptians with their library at Alexandria. The growth of the Roman Empire gave a common language to learned man which would be used for writing in the West for the next 2,500 years. Latin. But what was written in Latin, and who read it? With the adoption of Christianity by the Romans, the scriptures were perpetuated in Latin by monk scribes. Many taking 20 years or more to copy an illustrated Bible, which may have only been viewed by its author and his bishop. Only a very few people could actually read and write, not even all the nobility were educated. One would listen to the word of God in church, read out by the priest in Latin, so if you didn't understand Latin, bad luck. Bible stories were translated by the priest in Sunday schools, into the myriad of local languages. Storytelling was how the word was diffused. Books were very rare and precious. These practices were maintained until, in the late 15th century, with the development of cheaper paper and the reinvention of the printing press by William Caxton. The Chinese had been using the press for several hundred years. Books could be printed en masse, so to speak. But they weren't. Whatever books were printed were still in Latin and expensive, and more importantly, illiteracy was still very common. Anyway, who was writing anything new, worth reading? Writing in English became popular in England in the 16th century. The English language had changed drastically over the last 150 years. Anglo-Saxon had been replaced by Old English after the Norman influence, and the great vowel change was still taking place, further converting this. Anybody capable of reading in modern English can understand Shakespeare's written works from the 1500s. But nobody read Shakespeare's works, they weren't printed. They were handwritten scores for plays. People watched and listened to his work. He was a vocal, visual blogger. Even in the decade of 1660 to 1669, the first well-known diarist, Samuel Pepys, famous for his entry about the Great Fire of London in 1666, didn't print his diary. That came nearly 200 years later. Diaries were still private and would only be read by the public after being printed as memoirs. Books were still expensive and very few knew how to read, until the Industrial Revolution. With the boom of new industries and the need for qualified workers, schools were set up to teach the public the rudiments of education. The 3 R's. Reading, writing and arithmetic. From the late 19th century on, the keeping of diaries and scrapbooks became very popular and many, by more famous people, were published. Which brings us back to modern days Neves. I talked about journals and diaries as the precursors to blogs. They're a bit different. Are there different types of blogs?
Yes, there are, Tom. There are different types of blogs, and also some alternatives to blogging, just as we have ventured into the colorful past of many ways to record events and experiences, so too there are many types of blogging and alternatives to blogging. Blogging in its simplest form stands for communication, Whether that is a form of stating fact or opinion, it is just that, a form of one person or entity communicating to the open public or private audience. Yes, because blogs can be made for private audiences too. Blogs can be termed reader blogs, no interaction from viewers as it is a reading journal, much like a magazine. Then there are the interactive blogs where the visitors can leave comments and even interact with other visitors. Some blogs only deal with a particular topic, while others are more akin to a personal diary. Blogs have been used to record trainee teachers in their learning stages as a means to showcase their studies. Some blogs are purely marketing strategies full of ads and product information. Others yet are informative blogs such as travel and holiday resorts. Blogs are also seen as a form of social interaction. Alternatives to blogging are of course all other social media like Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Google+, etc. But if you are wanting to really make a dent into the blog world, then one way is to guest blog, for want of a better term. Leave a substantially important comment on an already highly popular or famed blog site, hence guest. One last note to bear in mind: whatever you publish online can be impressed in stone, so beware, and leave a culturally sound comment whenever you blog.